The snow fell softly against the vast glass walls of the penthouse, turning the New York skyline into a watercolor of white hush and blurred lights. Inside, Alexander Reed stood alone by the window, hands in his pockets, eyes on nothing. Billionaire, mogul, genius, none of those titles meant anything right now. His world, for all its polished floors and priceless art, was quiet in the worst way. No laughter. No warmth. Only the echo of what used to be a family before illness and grief hollowed it out. In the next room, a soft hum of medical machines reminded him that even all his money could not buy his daughter a simple word, like Daddy. Ella was 7, born with cerebral palsy that turned every small thing into a mountain she had to climb. He had flown in therapists from Europe, top speech pathologists from Boston, signed checks that could build entire hospitals. Yet every night he sat by her bed, whispering the same useless promise, Daddy will fix it. Outside Manhattan, traffic moved like rivers of white headlights and red brake lights. But in here, Alexander felt time had frozen around him. He could hear his own heartbeat louder than the world beyond the glass. He remembered Helen's laugh, his late wife's laugh, how the walls used to carry music bedtime stories, the soft tap of Ella's baby feet before they learned she would never run like other kids. He exhaled into the silence. Money could buy walls of glass. But tonight, like every night, it could not buy one small voice saying Daddy. Alexander came home early that evening. He was supposed to be at a dinner downtown, shaking hands with men whose names he barely respected, but halfway through his driver's route, he asked him to turn around. Maybe it was the snow, or maybe it was the ache behind his eyes. Either way, he needed to stand in the one place that still felt like Helen might walk back through the door. He stepped inside the penthouse expecting the same hush, the same sterile calm that mocked him every night. But tonight was different. As he slipped off his coat, he heard it faint but unmistakable. A rhythm, not the cold, lifeless tick of medical equipment, but something warmer. A melody hummed under breath. He followed the sound down the hallway past Ella's therapy room, with its rainbow of abandoned toys, past Helen's old piano, covered in dust sheets. The hum grew clearer. He paused outside the sunroom, the only part of the house that still caught the sunset whole. Through the glass doors he saw them. Ella was standing in her pink socks on the polished wooden floor. Her small hands rested in the bigger, careful hands of Maria Lopez, the cleaning lady he had barely registered for months. Maria swayed gently barefoot, humming a song Alexander did not recognize but somehow felt in his chest. And Ella was laughing. A sound so pure it made something behind his ribs crack open. He wanted to burst through the door, shout her name, ask Maria what on earth she thought she was doing. But he stayed frozen, hidden behind the glass. Maria leaned closer to Ella and whispered something that made the little girl giggle again. The child's shoulders relaxed into the sway, her legs shaky but determined. Maria was dancing her in slow circles, moving her weight from one foot to the other, guiding her through a dance no doctor had ever taught. In that moment, Alexander saw what all his millions could not give. Laughter, balance, music inside a little girl's heart. He pressed a hand to the doorframe to steady himself and thought, what have I missed all this time? The next morning, Alexander called for Maria. He waited in his office, the one room in the penthouse that still smelled faintly of his late wife's favorite jasmine candle. He sat behind his mahogany desk, pretending to read emails, while the image of his daughter's smile replayed in his head like a loop he could not switch off. When Maria knocked softly and stepped inside, her posture told him she was ready to be fired. "Sir, you wanted to see me." Her voice was gentle, careful as if she had rehearsed every word. Her cleaning apron was crisp, her hair tied back the same way it always was. Nothing about her looked different yet. Alexander could not unsee the way she had held Ella upright, laughing, balancing a child who had never balanced on her own. He gestured for her to sit, but Maria stayed standing, her hands clasped in front of her. Last night, Alexander began, then stopped. He did not know how to shape gratitude into a sentence without sounding like a man who had lost control of his own house. "I saw you. With Ella." Maria lowered her eyes. I'm sorry if I overstepped, sir. She was restless, so I just... He cut her off with a small shake of his head. She laughed. Do you understand? She laughed. Do you know how long it's been since I heard that sound? Maria lifted her gaze slowly, her eyes soft but strong. There's music in her, she said, echoing the line she had whispered to Ella when she thought no one was listening. I just helped her find it. He leaned back, studying this woman who had blended into the background for months, the cleaning lady who knew where every forgotten corner gathered dust, but somehow also knew where his daughter's voice was hiding. You're not trained for this, he said almost to himself. You're not a therapist. You're not. Maria interrupted her tone, respectful but unflinching. I used to dance ballet in Puerto Rico before life got complicated. She gave a small, sad smile. Music and movement help people heal even when doctors say nothing can be done. Alexander felt the sting behind his eyes again, the same raw edge that had cracked open when he first heard Ella giggle. He thought of all the specialists, the imported equipment, the checks he had written without blinking. And here was Maria paid to scrub floors, fixing something they never could. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. Maria shrugged. It was not my place. I was here to clean, not interfere. He looked at her, then really looked, at the hands that wiped down tables but also cradled his daughter's small fists, at the feet that swept across marble floors but knew the steps of a dance long forgotten. And for the first time, Alexander Reed, who owned a dozen corporations and entire blocks of Manhattan, felt small in front of someone no one else even saw. Do you think you could keep helping her? He asked quietly. Maria took a breath. If you'll let me. In that breath, the silent penthouse felt a little less empty. From that day on, the penthouse slowly changed in ways money had never managed to buy. It began with small, unannounced moments. In the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, the cleaning cart would stand abandoned in the hallway, while Maria sat cross-legged on the carpet helping Ella tap rhythms on overturned pots and pans. A few days later, Alexander would catch them in the library, Maria guiding Ella's tiny feet across the marble floor, as if the grand old room were a dance studio no one had known they needed. Sometimes he joined them, awkward at first. The CEO, who commanded entire boardrooms, now found himself kneeling on the carpet, holding his daughter's waist as she wobbled through a few proud steps. Ella's laughter was a magnet pulling him closer every time he thought about retreating behind his cold office door. The therapists still came once a week with their polite nods and their checklists, but Maria's lessons, if they could be called that, were different. They were softer, more patient. No charts to measure success. No milestones that loomed like cliffs Ella could never climb. Just music clapping silly rhymes in Spanish and English. Sometimes Alexander would stand just outside the doorway and listen. There's a song in her, Maria would whisper when Ella got stuck between syllables. Let her sing it in her own time. One evening, as the snow came down heavy against the windows, Alexander watched Maria teach Ella how to mimic the words of a lullaby. It was just 3 notes, a simple sound. But when Ella's mouth shaped the final word and her tiny voice matched Maria's, Alexander turned away, eyes burning. He pressed a hand against the cold glass, feeling the city hum below him, and wondered how many other miracles he had overlooked while chasing the next deal, the next title. His nights shifted too. The silence that used to feel like punishment now held something warm. Maria's humming would drift through the halls after Ella was asleep. Sometimes Alexander would find Maria sitting beside the little girl's bed, telling stories of a childhood in Puerto Rico, of bright skirts and crowded kitchens, where everyone sang even when they were tired. She'd look up and whisper, "She dreams better when there's music in the air." On Fridays, Maria would stay later than her shift at Alexander's insistence to eat dinner with them. At first she refused, uncomfortable. "I am not family, sir," she said the first night, shaking her head. But Ella had wrapped small arms around Maria's leg, her version of a protest. Alexander only nodded toward the extra chair. "Maybe you should be," he said softer than he meant to. When the Lily Center was just an idea scribbled in his notebook, it was Maria's voice he heard. They need movement, not just medicine, she'd said once, her palm pressed over Ella's tiny heartbeat. It stuck with him. He started asking questions about grant spaces, what they could build together. Maria would listen wide-eyed but doubtful. I do not run things. I clean them, she would say. But every time Ella took a step, every new word, every note sung just right, it was Maria's work that made it possible. On the night Alexander finally told her his plan, Maria sat at the long dining table, her hands folded around a mug of tea. Ella was asleep down the hall, exhausted from an evening of off-key songs and wobbly dance steps. Alexander spoke quietly, his voice steady but his fingers drumming the table like he couldn't believe his own courage. I want you to run it with me, he said. A place for kids like Ella. A place for parents like me who thought the answer was a check instead of a song. Maria shook her head, at first overwhelmed. But when she glanced at the hallway where Ella's laughter still seemed to echo, she whispered, Then teach me how. In that moment, the penthouse didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them could name, but both knew they would build together one quiet miracle at a time. Spring arrived in the city like a shy promise, melting the last patches of snow from the park across the street from Alexander's tower. By then, the penthouse felt less like a glass cage and more like the starting point of something alive. Contractors and lawyers came and went. Plans were drawn and redrawn on Alexander's marble dining table, but in every sketch, every diagram, Maria's voice was there. They named it the Ella Center, not just for his daughter, but for what the name meant in Spanish. She. A promise that every little girl or boy who stepped through those doors would be seen for who they truly were, not just a diagnosis on paper. Maria came to work every morning in the same sturdy shoes, pushing the same cleaning cart, but at night she sat across from Alexander, pages of ideas spread between them. She'd tap her pen against the table, hesitant at first. What if we have rooms for dance, not just therapy? Kids learn to feel music in their bones, she'd say. Alexander would nod, scribble it down. And storytellers, she'd add, eyes shining. Stories teach bravery. Sometimes she doubted herself. I clean floors. What do I know about running a place like this? She'd whisper when Ella was asleep. Alexander would answer with the same quiet certainty every time. You know how to open my daughter's heart. That's all you need. Word spread. Investors called, curious at first, then captivated. Donors who once ignored his invitations now lined up to be part of something that felt more human than any venture Alexander had ever pitched. He never told them about Maria's shoes tracking mop water down the hallway at night, or how she scribbled ideas on napkins while packing Ella's toys into boxes marked for the new center. He didn't need to. They would feel it when they saw the kids. The day they signed the lease for the old community theater 2 blocks from Central Park, Maria stood frozen on the cracked sidewalk, staring up at the faded marquee. This place is too big for me, she whispered. Alexander only handed her the key. Good. Then you'll have to grow into it. The months that followed were a whirl of paint fumes, spilled coffee, late nights spent translating Maria's dreams into floor plans and budgets. Some nights, Alexander would catch Maria standing in the empty main room, once a stage, now a blank canvas for music and laughter. She'd close her eyes, sway a little like she could already hear children's voices bouncing off the old brick walls. By the time the first families arrived, the Ella Center smelled like fresh paint and new hope. Maria greeted every parent at the door, bending to meet every child at eye level. Welcome, she'd say in English, then Spanish, sometimes both. Here you dance with your heart first. Ella was there on opening day, clutching Maria's hand, squealing, when she saw the bright mural on the back wall, a swirl of colors that looked like movement frozen in paint. She ran, not walked, ran down the main hallway, her giggles echoing like a song. Parents whispered to each other about the billionaire who stood quietly at the back, sleeves rolled up, carrying boxes and tightening loose screws when no one asked him to. But he didn't care. He only watched his daughter spin in circles, her steps wobbly but free. One night when the last family had left and the building was quiet, except for the hum of the city outside, Alexander found Maria sitting cross-legged on the floor of the dance room, shoes kicked off, hair falling loose. She was humming the same old lullaby she'd taught Ella months ago. When he stepped closer, she looked up, a question in her eyes. "Do you ever wish you had just stayed the maid?" he asked, half teasing. Maria smiled, shaking her head. "No. A cleaning lady washes away dirt. Here I get to wash away fear." Alexander sat beside her, the floor cold beneath his tailored trousers. He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. Outside the big window, the city lights flickered like stars. But inside, the real miracle danced barefoot across the polished floors, a little girl's laughter carrying into the night. By the time spring gave way to summer, the Ella Center had already become a whispered miracle in the city. Newspapers ran warm profiles about the billionaire who built something for kids instead of profit. TV crews lingered outside the doors, trying to catch glimpses of children taking their first steps to the beat of Maria's songs. But behind the painted walls and cheerful murals, something older and heavier waited, a secret that clung to Maria like a faded bruise. One evening, the sun dipped low behind the skyline, spilling gold into Maria's small office. She was sorting art supplies when she heard a soft knock. Alexander stood there, not with his usual tired smile, but with an envelope in his hand, edges worn like it had been read and reread too many times. "You have a visitor," he said. His voice betrayed something she couldn't name. Worry. Or maybe hope. The visitor was an elderly woman with trembling hands and eyes that reminded Maria of home. She wore a cardigan too warm for the season, clutching a faded purse to her chest. When she spoke, her accent still clung to every word like a memory. "Maria, I am Rosa," she said gently. "I knew your mother." Maria froze, marker still uncapped in her hand. She wanted to run, but her feet stayed rooted to the bright playmat under her desk. Rosa opened her purse and took out a thin, creased will, the paper fragile like old skin. "This was written by your mother before she died," Rosa said, voice shaking. "She asked me to keep it safe until I found you." Alexander sat beside Maria, silent eyes flicking between the paper and the woman who suddenly felt like a ghost. Rosa placed the will on the table. Maria's hands trembled as she unfolded it, eyes scanning the words she could barely piece together. "I don't understand," Maria whispered. "Why now?" Rosa's eyes glistened. "Your mother was alone for so long. She wanted you to know the truth someday, but only when it was safe, when you had something better than cleaning floors." Alexander leaned forward, reading over Maria's shoulder. His breath caught when he saw his father's name, ink faded but unmistakable. A silence heavier than any skyscraper settled over them. "It says you and I," Alexander's voice faltered, raw and thin. "We share blood." Maria pressed a hand to her mouth, shaking her head. "No, that can't be." But the paper didn't care for doubt. It told the story of a man who built empires but hid his sins, of a woman who raised a child alone because the promise of wealth came with locked doors and sealed lips. For a long time, the only sound was the hum of the city outside the window, muffled laughter of children echoing down the hallway. Finally, Maria turned to Alexander. Her voice was small but clear. "You're my brother," she said. The word tasted strange, like a truth too big for her tongue. Alexander reached for her hand, his own trembling. "You saved my daughter. You saved me. All this time you were family and I didn't know." Maria let out a shaky laugh, the kind that comes from relief, tangled with disbelief. "I didn't know either," she whispered. Outside, Ella's laughter rose like a promise through the open door, filling the small office with warmth. Alexander squeezed Maria's hand, voice quiet but certain. "Blood or not," he said, "this was always home." And just like that, the truth settled between them, not as a burden, but as a bridge. The cleaning lady who once swept away dust now swept away secrets too, leaving only the clean, bright truth that family sometimes hides in the unlikeliest places, waiting for its own dance to begin. Months after the truth broke open, the silence of their lives, the Ella Center thrived like a living heartbeat. Children's laughter echoed through bright hallways lined with murals Maria designed herself. In every corner, music drifted, a soft piano here, a gentle guitar there, weaving dreams. where once there had only been quiet struggle. Alexander watched from the hallway one afternoon as Maria twirled Ella under a paper banner that read Family Day. Parents clapped. Volunteers wiped tears when children took uncertain steps, balancing on the beat of songs Maria hummed under her breath. Ella, once hidden behind therapy doors and medical charts, ran down the hallway arms wide, as if she could catch the sun. Alexander felt a warmth in his chest that no deal or stock price had ever given him. He knew now what real wealth looked like: his daughter's unguarded smile, Maria's gentle laughter, the simple fact that his legacy would not be another cold tower, but a place alive with footsteps and hope. Later that evening, the three of them sat together on the old wooden bench near the garden behind the center. The city skyline glowed gold and silver behind them, but none of them noticed. Ella leaned her head on Maria's shoulder, her hair catching the last rays of sun. "Do you think she knows?" Maria asked softly, brushing a strand of hair from Ella's forehead. Alexander smiled. "She knows more than either of us ever did. She's the reason we found each other." Maria looked at him, really looked the way only someone who knew every broken edge could. "I still feel like the cleaning lady some days." Alexander chuckled, shaking his head. "You're not. You never were. You were the heartbeat this house needed long before we knew it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Maria stared at it, then back at him, confusion flickering in her eyes, until he flipped it open to reveal a simple gold pendant, engraved with two words, "Always Family." "It's not a ring," Alexander said with a quiet laugh when he saw her eyes widen. "It's a promise. For you. For Ella. For all of us." Maria touched the pendant with trembling fingers. "Family." She whispered the word, fragile but stronger than any fortune. Ella stirred half asleep on Maria's shoulder. She lifted her head, her voice clear in the soft dusk. "Family," she repeated, her favorite word. In that moment, under the quiet hush of the city and the blooming garden, the billionaire, the cleaning lady, and the little girl built something no money could buy: a home stitched together by laughter and second chances. The world would remember Alexander for towers and deals, for headlines and charity galas. But when he looked at Maria and Ella, he knew the real legacy would live not in buildings, but in moments like this, ordinary, extraordinary, and forever theirs. And somewhere deep inside him, he hoped people would say one thing long after he was gone. He once hired a cleaning lady who taught his daughter to dance, and in doing so, she taught him how to live.